道に変わるのだろう目撃せよ試すだけ
Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. Now, I've mentioned Power Rangers quite a bit on my channel, as well as its source material, Super Sentai, but one thing I haven't mentioned quite as much is Sentai's sister series, Kamen Rider. Created by the same person as Super Sentai, Shotaro Ishinomori, Kamen Rider follows a roughly similar premise, though it follows a single main character rather than a team of heroes, who takes on a more form to battle an evil organization bent on world domination, who more often than not are partially responsible for the creation of the season's Kamen Rider in the first place. And while Kamen Riders may not have access to giant robots, which admittedly they don't need since Monsters of the Week growing to giant size is an extreme exception rather than the rule it is over in Sentai, Kamen Rider more than makes up for it with some kick-ass bikes and stunts. Additionally, it's interesting to see the title of Kamen Rider be something the protagonists of the season must earn, usually through a selfless display of heroism. And to longtime viewers of my channel, they probably find it funny that I'm finally talking about Kamen Rider. The villains of Kamen Rider V3 refer to themselves as Destron, the name used by the Decepticons in all of the Japanese Transformers shows that I've reviewed. To say nothing of this guy showing up in a later issue of the IDW comics. Since Kamen Rider and Super Sentai are big pop culture touchstones in Japan and have been airing back-to-back with each other since 2000, it makes sense to have some kind of crossover. And yet, it wasn't until Kamen Rider Decade in 2009 when we finally got some kind of team-up. But Toei certainly made up for lost time in the past few years by not only having an annual crossover with the current year's Rider and Sentai, but also movie crossovers for the two franchises as a whole. A Kamen Rider Super Sentai crossover movie, you say? Sounds like something every fan would want, right? I mean, that's hundreds of different combinations of characters teaming up and having adventures that these specific characters can have. As long as they don't shove too many in at once, right? I mean, Toei wouldn't disregard the traits and history of most of the characters in the movie, leaving them either as blank slates or drastically out of character. Just get this over with. So, as you just saw, the movie opens with Marvelous, the leader of the Gokaigers, facing off against the original 7 Kamen Riders, and defeats them all. By himself. I'd say having access to his 34 predecessors' powers gives Marvelous an advantage, but not only do the writers have the experience and numbers to counter that, but Marvelous having past powers creates several plot holes that tear this thing apart. Once the dust clears, Tsukasa, Kamen Rider Decade, makes his own threat, though we never do see him attacking the original Sentai, Himitu Sentai Go Ranger. We're just told about it after the fact. This was a lose-lose situation if you ask me. Showing Tsukasa defeating the Go Rangers would have been just as disrespectful as Marvelous defeating the original 7 Riders here. But not showing it is both a cop-out and makes it look like the writers just threw it in as an afterthought. You know, kind of like... Nope, I'm not doing it. I'm saving this rant. There's another part of the movie that deserves it way more. The next 40 minutes of this movie is, unfortunately, a series of sequences that are basically counterparts to each other. Did that make any sense? Let me explain. After the title card, we cut to the high school of Gentaro, Kamen Rider Forza, and the current writer at the time this movie came out, under attack by the Zangiak, the villains from Gokaiger. Marvelous then personally attacks Forza in a battle that's slightly less one-sided, before being flanked by the Zangiak forces, revealing they are now working for him, which now includes several main villains from past seasons. And most of them just stand there not contributing to the plot. The only one that really has any role in the film is Bioman villain Silva. Well, at least it's not fucking Radiguet. And the Go Busters, the then current Sentai team, come to attacked by Decade villains Dai Shocker. Same with them being a bunch of past villains who silently follow Tsukasa. You could replace every single one of them with foot soldiers and it would make no difference to the story. And get a load of the redesigned Dr. Gi. I guess it's an improvement over his original appearance in Kamen Rider V3, but I have to ask, if they're willing to update Gi's design, why do the Shocker combat men still look like this? Even the other characters in the movie notice this discrepancy. Anyway, in both scenes, the other Gokaiters show up to help and try to get an answer out of Marvelous and Takasa to figure out why they're doing all this. They get non-answers.
答えは簡単だ。ライダーはスーパー戦隊の敵だからな。
でも仮面ライダーも悪と戦うヒーローのはずです。
ごちゃごちゃ言うな。すべてのライダーは俺が倒す。それだけだ。
なんでスーパー戦隊を倒すんだ。
じゃあなぜ戦隊はライダーを倒す。
戦隊。
俺にできることはこれ以上ライダーを倒されないよう戦隊を潰していくことだ。
I'd ask why Takasa is targeting every Sentai member except Marvelous, the one actually hunting his kind, but there is a real reason why. And it's dumb, but we'll get to that. The fight with Takasa results in 3 of the Gokaiters being defeated, disappearing in a puff of purple smoke, forcing the remaining 2, Joe and Doc, into retreat. Although considering that's what happens to everyone who gets defeated by Marvelous and Takasa, I don't know why Joe and Doc are under the impression their teammates are dead. I know the audience sure as hell isn't fooled. Once again, the pattern of counterpart scenes continue as Marvelous talks with his villain followers, planning on attacking Kamen Rider O's, which leads directly to O's getting attacked. Similarly, Takasa addresses his own troops before attacking the Go-Sagers. I do get the sense Marvelous has really gone out the deep end at this point though, as once he beats O's, he orders his villain soldiers to attack O's friend Hina, who fortunately gets rescued by Kaito, Kamen Rider D-End. They join forces with Joe and Doc, or at least try, as Joe flips the fuck out when he sees Kaito. I would side with Doc and Hina on this, since they specifically don't want to fight, but frankly, Joe's actor is one of the few in this movie actually giving a damn. Seriously, the look of confusion, abandonment, and betrayal on his face when he tries to talk to Marvelous, his rage at the sight of Kaito, it's one of the few performances in this film that isn't scene after scene of
No surprise!
So you're wrong, Mr.
Marvelous finally gives an answer as to why he and Takasa are fighting, and by that I mean he tells Joe to get answers from Tyoshi, the Red Go Ranger, who we were told had already been defeated by Takasa. But Kaito has a solution. Use the time trains from Kamen Rider Den O to go back in time to find him. At least they didn't pull all new trains out of their asses like a certain other big crossover. Our heroes arrive in the winter of 1976 and witness Tyoshi battling a Monster of the Week from Go Ranger. Somehow he already knows why they're there and asks to be brought to the present to resolve the conflict. Because that won't change history! Tyoshi is greeted by the 5 remaining Sentai teams and confronted by a handful of remaining riders, one of whom is Takeshi Hongo, Kamen Rider 1, who we saw Marvelous defeat at the beginning of the movie. Plot hole? Not this time, as when the dust clears and Tyoshi and Takeshi are the only ones left standing, they reveal they were actually Marvelous and Takasa.
Fuck, I don't even know where to start with this one.
Now, having access to the time trains explains how Joe and the others were able to time travel, but that does not explain how Marvelous was able to do the same. The only way he could have done that was using the Time Ranger's powers, but since they're not one of the 5 remaining teams, I can only assume Takasa already got them before this scene. Which leads to my next point. All throughout this movie, we've seen Marvelous and Takasa transform into past heroes, that being Decade and Gokaiter's gimmick, but while this is part of Takasa's power set by default, it's not for Marvelous. If past heroes still have their powers, then Marvelous shouldn't be able to transform into any of them. Later crossovers revealed the Gokaiters would send one of their own to ask past teams to borrow their powers, but if Marvelous actually did that this time around, that implies he left several Red Sentai members without their powers, which would have only made Takasa's job easier. Either that or the filmmakers forgot this little detail. Oh, and as if that wasn't enough, Marvelous and Takasa more or less end their friendships with Joe and Kaito on the spot, and I'm not exaggerating here when I says it feels like a genuine breakup scene. And then quote-unquote kill them. This was counterproductive for both of them, but I'll get to that in a second. First, yeah, Guy originally had a funny way of pronouncing the name Kamen Rider. I figures it would transition over to the modern day.
ライダーと戦隊のどちらかしか生き残れないという嘘にまんまと騙されたのだ。戦隊粒子反応、ライダー粒子反応、ともにゼロ。
戦隊とライダーが全滅した今こそビッグマシン計画を実行するとき。
Yeah, none remain, except for Forza and the Go-Busters, who escaped their respective battles. And Doc is standing right there. This wouldn't be the first time he was the last man standing against impossible odds. But no, this isn't our darkest hour after all, as Marvelous and Takasa reveal that they were onto the villains the whole time, and hadn't actually killed anyone. They just sent the other riders and Sentai to another dimension so they could all show up here for one big battle. In other words, this movie is one big idiot plot. If Marvelous and Takasa somehow found out about the villains' plans, then why was attacking and sending their comrades to another dimension Plan A? You could have skipped the whole Riders Sentai war by simply assembling the forces of good and then take the villains off guard. I was actually under the impression Marvelous and Takasa were the ones bringing dead villains back to life to fight for them, what with that Go Ranger monster in the past. Not to mention Silva being a robot, somebody had to rebuild and reprogram him to hunt riders. This revelation basically means the villains came back to life with no explanation. Do you see why I mentioned Sean Exuki and his poorly written fanfiction I spent little over a year reading? It's because this theatrically released film is basically the same damn thing. Oh sure, we don't have any "you guys are so much better than us" talk or clear bias as to which franchise is the filmmaker's favorite, but it still has the heroes doing dumb things to move the paper-thin plot forward, missing little lore details that result in plot holes up the ass, having no explanation for why the villains are back. For that matter, having Silva and Guy as the primary ones is an arbitrary choice at best. You could switch these two out with any of the other villains who only exist to be combatants in the final battle, and it wouldn't have changed anything. Hell, Brajura had a speaking line earlier. Switching him out with Silva might have actually been a better fit, what with his history of betraying allies. And as for Guy, well, during the final battle, he reveals he was actually Decade villain Narataki taking on Guy's form, so really, he could have been pretending to be anybody and it wouldn't have made a difference. At least this movie addresses how Joe and Kaito would feel betrayed by their comrades, so this isn't quite the same level as Super Sentai vs. Power Rangers. But it did equally not think of the implications of what it was doing. Marvelous and Takasa's actions should have driven a permanent wedge between the two hero groups. During the credits, Marvelous and O's tries to imply a strong friendship has been formed, but that's bullshit.
汚い手を使いよってそれでも正義のヒーローか。
悪を倒すためならどんなに汚れた泥でもかぶる。それが本当のヒーローってもんだろ。
You have no idea what a hero is. This is a hero. Not this. So our heroes morph and the battle ensues. The fight is pretty flashy and doesn't have much substance, but at least it gives what the movie promises. Kamen Riders and Super Sentai fighting side by side. Oh, how meta is it to see characters whose shows air together teaming up. Kamen Rider Denno and the Geki Rangers, Kamen Rider Kiva and the Go-Rangers, Kamen Rider Hibiki and the Maji Rangers, and Kamen Rider Black and the Maskmen. I don't know how Kamen Rider Black and Black RX are in the same battle since Black RX is the same character with an upgraded power set, but whatever. What happens next is even more fan-fiction-y. Disgusted with Takasa's actions, Kaito takes control of the villain's doomsday weapon, the Big Machine, and sets it loose on the heroes. I think it's a little late for the protagonist and antagonist to switch places, don't you think? Whatever, the Go-Busters and Fours battle the Big Machine, flying into space to take it down, which is pretty awesome, I admit, though the CGI is garbage. The Go-Kiters defeat Silva using O's powers, though unfortunately they just put it into their canon instead of actually fighting as O's other forms, while Riders Decade, Ryuki, and Blade defeat Guy using the Ghost Sager's powers, who, like I already said, reveals he was actually Narataki before retreating. At the very least, we end the movie on Forza and the Go-Busters interacting.
If only because these four at least acted like heroes and allies despite limited screen time. More than I can say for the characters the movie actually focused on. Superhero Taisen is 100% squandered potential. Think about this premise for a second. Something is hunting Kamen Riders and Super Sentai? A handful of heroes from both sides catch wind of what's going on and investigate? This plot should have written itself. They didn't have to turn Marvelous and Takasa into villains. Of course, what I just described sounds like it would make for a better miniseries than movie, since a lot of character interaction and development would have to be condensed if that was the story they went with. One could say I'm putting too much thought into this, since the plot is not the selling point. The writer-Sentai conflict is. That might explain the acting in this movie. Seriously, I've seen Go Busters. I know these three can do, well, slightly better than this. And the fake shemps standing in for actors who don't reprise their roles don't sound anything like the originals. And the action itself is hit and miss. The one-on-one battles are pretty good, but get more than 4 or 5 characters in the same sequence and it suddenly turns into 1 or 2 blows before going straight to their finishing moves. Given this movie uses the same resources as the TV shows, expecting high-quality CGI is foolish, but wow, is it worse than usual, especially at the end with the big machine fight. And does someone want to tell me why there are several Kalish explosions here? I thought those weren't in the Sentai source material.
Oh, but my issues with this movie, they don't stop at just the production issues. No, I am also referring to the rivalry established in universe between the writers and Sentai.
All throughout this movie, Marvelous and Takasa tell the other Sentai and writers they can't coexist and never give a reason why. The closest we get is this one line.
Kamen Riderの枠がなくならなければ戦隊の枠は生まれなかったのですから。枠?
Naturally, I didn't understand what the fuck he was talking about. Until I found out the significance of the year 1976, and realized that this fictional character is talking about a time slot for a TV show he is in. See, back in 1975, Kamen Rider Stronger moved its air date to later in the day, with the early morning slot it originally filled going to Himitu Sentai Go Ranger. And as a result, Stronger got lower ratings, and plus the season's general decline in production quality, led to Kamen Rider going on hiatus for a few years, while Sentai kept going strong with 2 more years of Go Ranger after that. This out-of-universe moment, when no Kamen Rider season was airing side by side with a season of Super Sentai, is the in-universe reason why all this is happening. This is probably the most damning similarity the film has with Zuki's work. It makes no fucking sense as to why a production decision by Toei would exist in the actual shows. The characters would have to know that they were fictional and exist in a TV show, and I can't say either franchise is that meta. Sure, it was a lie perpetrated by Silva and Narataki, but what exactly was their evidence of this rivalry that would have had to give to Marvelous and Takasa? The answer is nothing!
Thank you for putting that physical copy of this movie that I totally have on my shelf. Next time we will be moving away from Japan, however, and instead moving to another island nation, Great Britain, where we'll be looking at, of all things, a novelization of a B-movie. No, it's not the one you're thinking of.
Silver ライダー粒子反応を示すものはすべて破壊する。何がライダーハンターだ。ライダー粒子反応あり。